Hi, Jerry Jenkins here, talking about all things writing. Today, about building a believable world for your novel. Story worlds done right should feel as real as the world we live in. A book like A Game of Thrones, a movie like Star Wars, or even a video game like Final Fantasy can make it seem their creators have effortlessly built an entire fantasy world out of nothing. Let me assure you, in every case, the task was anything but effortless. If you don't know the steps to take, or if you skip an essential part of the process, your story won't be nearly as compelling. 2/3 of my more than 200 books have been novels. Still, creating fictional worlds never seems to get easier. It's an art, regardless of genre, but in fantasy and science fiction, world building can make or break your story. In this video, I'll give you 6 steps to immersive world building, including 2 different types and some examples. But first, what is world building? Writing a story is much like building a house. You can have all the right ideas, materials, and tools, but if your foundation isn't solid, not even the most beautiful structure will stand. World building is one of the foundations of your story. It's where the action occurs. But a story world involves more than just your setting. Your world can be as complex as a unique country with exotic creatures, rich political histories, and even new religions. Or it can be as simple as tweaking the history of the world we live in. Complex or simple, world building is serious business. You need to create a plausible world in which readers can lose themselves. Essentially, you can build one of 2 types of worlds. The first is a real-world fantasy. You set your story in the world we live in, but your plot is based either on real events, as in Outlander, or imagines historical events differently, for instance, as if Germany had won World War II. In The Man in the High Castle, for example, Philip K. Dick imagines a world in which Franklin D. Roosevelt was assassinated in the early 1930s, resulting in the U.S. losing World War II. Your other option is known as second world fantasy. Here you create new lands, species, and governments. You also invent a world rich in its own history, geography, and purpose. Popular examples include A Game of Thrones, The Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Discworld. Some novels combine real-world and second-world fantasy. The Harry Potter series, for instance, is set in our world, but with its own set of rules and history. The Chronicles of Narnia and Alice in Wonderland also use interrelated approaches. Regardless of whether you choose option 1, 2, or a combination of both, your job is to keep readers to the very end. How do you do that? Here are 6 suggested steps. First, plan, but don't overplan. Outliners tend to map out everything before they start writing. For pantsers, those of us who write by the seat of our pants as a process of discovery, build our story worlds as we go. For us, overplanning would be a problem. We could become so engrossed in world building that we find reasons not to write. Do what works best for you, but don't let world building come at the expense of getting words onto the page. If you're an outliner, start writing as soon as you're ready, knowing you'll likely have more world building to do as you go. Okay, the second step is to describe your world. You want readers to see, smell, hear, and touch their surroundings, but don't try to simply describe this as a separate element. Rather, have characters live in and interact with it, allowing it to emerge as part of the action. Will readers find an otherworldly landscape, a new language, strange creatures? When James Cameron wrote the movie Avatar, he created countless reference books on Pandora's vegetation, climate, and even botany. Many fantasies also include maps, including The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, and The Princess Bride by William Goldman. To help you flesh out your setting, ask yourself questions like the ones you'll find in a more comprehensive list at the link in the description below this video. Was your world always the way it is now? If not, what was it like and what changed? How does the terrain influence your story? What is the weather like, and does it matter? Where are the borders? What are the natural resources, and how do they impact your story? Next, populate your world. Are the inhabitants people like you and me, or are they slightly different? Or are they aliens, monsters, or some new species? In The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien first determined what a hobbit looked like and how he lived, then gave Frodo a past, personality traits, and morals. Ask yourself about your characters. How big is their population? Which would naturally determine the size of your world. What's their backstory? What are the genders, races, and species? How do they get along? Once you've fleshed out your characters, step 4 is establishing the history of your world. History informs the present, such as in The Lord of the Rings, where characters focus on an ancient war. The Hunger Games is built on decades of oppression. The Divergent trilogy has characters who are unaware of what their world used to be like. When building your history, consider the deep past, what happened to fuel the present economy, environment, culture, etc. Traumas like wars, famines, and plagues, and power shifts, political, religious, or technological. History questions you should ask. Who have been the major rulers? What took place during their reigns? Who are their enemies? Who wields power behind the scenes? Next, determine your world's culture. Culture includes aspects like religion, society, and politics. In Star Wars, for example, religion, the Jedi versus the dark side, societal structure, slaves versus free citizens, and politics, the trade wars, all play huge roles. When creating your world's culture, ask these questions. Is your world totalitarian, authoritarian, or democratic? Do your inhabitants speak a common language? Is there conflict between religious or political groups? How do different social classes behave? What kind of work do they do? You can find more helpful questions at the link here. Finally, step 6, define what powers fuel your world. Is your world energized by equipment or magic? Equipment could involve artificial intelligence, space or time travel, or futuristic weaponry, or it could involve conventional swords, guns, horses. In 2001, A Space Odyssey, Arthur C. Clarke went into great detail on how technology worked and why. But when Ian M. Banks wrote his futuristic novels, he referenced droids and spaceships without explaining how they worked. As for magic, you can either explain how it works or simply focus on how and why it's used. When powering your story, ask yourself, does magic exist? How powerful is it? Where does it come from? Can it be controlled? Who wields it and how? If you go the technology route, determine what technologies people use, who controls it, how they use it. Have fun creating your world and a story that keeps your readers riveted to the end. Well, thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please like it, leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to my page. And if you'd like more help writing your novel, see my video on how to write a novel. All the best with your writing, and I'll see you next time.